I'm George. I run RocDev, also record and do stuff for RocPy. I have a Python talk. Here I am doing both at one big thing. RocDev, you can get to our website, roc.dev. We have our list of our upcoming events. Join our Slack. We got one new person today. And upcoming events, we're going to start doing a first of the month, just kind of like lunch hangout. First Friday of every month. No topic on schedule. Probably just talk about whatever we find cool at the moment or whatever you want. I don't care. Also, the RocPy website, I noticed that they mentioned these are 45 to 60-minute presentations. My goal is 45 or less, so we'll see that. But I don't know. I can sometimes talk for a long time. So we'll see. And if at any point you have a question, ask it. Feel free to unmute, shout it. I also have the chat window open up above me, but I'm not going to be looking at that screen as often, so just shout. Also, I do presentations in a very informal way. Like, I'm not going to hit the present button on Keynote. You're just going to see my Keynote. So I try to keep I guess the bar lower, right? So feel free to just throw out comments, whatever you want. I can handle it. All right. Josh, any other announcements?
No, other than we're always looking for people to give talks. Anything even tangentially Python related, we are happy to hear it. So if you got a talk you're looking to give, like presenting stuff, come on down.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We'll take anybody. It's running meetups.
Mm-hmm.
Josh knows. Can be tricky. It is difficult, right? It is hard to find new people to give presentations. I mean, he even had to go so far as to say yes to me. So
Mm-hmm.
And I twist my arm.
Yeah, I said, hey, I think I have a Django talk. How's next month? Oh, okay, sure. All right. So please, anything you got, that's cool. We'd love to hear you. Even if it's just your development environment, which is kind of how this talk came about. And I guess I'll just show my screen. I've been asked to build a lot of development environments for people lately, and that was kind of weird. So I figured, well, all right, I'm just going to make this into a short little talk, because I think there's a lot of new technologies in here that, when working together, are actually kind of cool. So I titled this talk Django without Python, which, yes, clickbaity, but y'all clicked, so it worked. You do not need Python installed on your system to work with Django. So it's not really a lie or a fully clickbait title, because we will be working on Django, and it will use a completely different Python from what I have installed on my system. And for that, I'm going to be using two fairly ubiquitous tools these days of Docker and Visual Studio Code. And the other benefit here is that even if you have multiple Pythons you want, that's fine. They can all coexist. That's kind of the point of containers. So I'll just kind of break this down a little bit. Like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, or at least the problem that I had to solve for a few places? You want to work on a new project. Maybe that new project is because you're a new hire at an organization, or you've hired somebody. Maybe you found a cool open source project. I'm actually using this for the next version of the RocDev website. We're using a lot of the same things here. It's not built in Python, but we're using all the same tools, Docker, VS Code, all of that. The maintainers of the project, they may have set the Python version. You know, they may want to run in 3.7. They haven't tested with 3.8, or they want to use some of the new like F strings, and you on your system Python only have the older stuff. So you don't have all the new fancy features that Python keeps rolling out. So Python versions matter, and you want to work on that. But if you run that, if you install that new version or that version that project wants, it may mess with other projects you have going, especially in the open source ecosystem, right? Who knows which web app or what Python version, whatever you're using, supports. Some luckily support multiple versions. Hey, whatever. And yeah, maybe you only keep the latest on your system. So yeah, you need some flexibility. But like this may sound somewhat familiar. Like we've kind of solved this before, right? Like there's PyEnv, ASDF, which is kind of a generic tool that wraps PyEnv and NVM if you've used Node and all of these things, and kind of tries to isolate or to bring them all together, consolidate. There you go. The tools for managing different language environments. So that's cool, right? And ASDF just shells out to PyEnv, but yeah, so like that kind of works. But now I have more tools that I kind of have to install over and over again. Way back when, I don't know if anybody has used this, but HashiCorp has this tool called Vagrant. And the idea behind Vagrant is you're running a VirtualBox or Parallels if you're on Mac VM that installs all of the stuff that you need for that project into that virtual machine. So, if you have a Python project, you install Python into your virtual machine. Node.js, install that into your virtual machine. And that worked, right? Except, and you could automate all of that with Bash, Ansible, Chef, you name it, whatever you wanted to automate the provisioning, installing all your tools, you could use. So it was really nice. But, it does have some drawbacks, right? VMs are slow to start, right? You're launching a whole new kernel on your Mac, Windows, whatever. And it can be difficult to attach tools. So you have that IDE that you've had installed on your computer for who knows how long. You really like it. You kind of would have to duplicate a lot of the tool chain on your host and in your VM, just so you could kind of have everything work together, have your debuggers work. This is actually why I learned Vim and Emacs forever ago, because a VM, right? You just SSH into your VM. You have your command line tools, Vim, Emacs, Nano, whatever, and they just work, right? They're just there. They just work. So like that can be good. So if you're a Vim or Emacs user, and you can probably just do this and be happy. The problem is the rest of your team probably isn't. I don't think I know a single team that is fully Vim or fully Emacs or anything like that. So that can be a little tricky. But really, also VMs are expensive. If you have a Postgres server, which I mean, just about every Django app has at least Postgres or MySQL or Redis or all of them at some point. You're not going to run a separate VM with one of those running, right? Because now you have multiple VMs, and each VM holds a certain amount of CPU, memory, whatever. That ain't going to work. So this is kind of where containers come in and are really helpful. At this point, I think we can say Docker is ubiquitous. Everybody's probably either heard of it or used it by now. If you haven't installed it, do it. That's one of those core technologies that I think everybody has to know at this point. I can't find you a job description that doesn't mention containers, at least in some respect, especially for like web development. Embedded stuff, yeah, probably not, but whatever. One cool thing with containers, they start a lot faster. You can have a container, and I'll show this, start in, I don't know, less than a second. I don't even know how fast it is. It's just there. And they're using less CPU and memory, right? Because containers really are just processes. So if you want to run Postgres, that's a process, and a container is just isolating that process, right? So it provides you that safe space where you can just rm-rf/ all you want, and it doesn't matter because you just kill the container, start a new one, everything's back the way it was. So it's really fun to play with. And in development, that is so helpful, right? How often have you just wanted to say, screw it, blow it away, start over, and you're good? It's going to be a lot faster, where everything is just a process. But now, if everything is fully isolated, right? Like, how do you get things in and out? Well, you have to have some way of mounting files and mapping ports from the container back to the host, so that way you can get data in and out, right? So if you want to load up that web page, that new Django web page, we just hit localhost 8000. Cool, we're there. But wait, if everything is just a process, well, Python is a process. Bash is a process. Well, Visual Studio Code extensions are just processes. So all of these processes can run in containers. Visual Studio Code itself is going to still run on my Mac, but all of its extensions are going to run inside that container. And I'm going to tell that container which extensions it needs to have installed. So that'll be super helpful for us. And how are we going to do that? Well, there's one extension specifically for Visual Studio Code that it is still in beta, but it works. Where we can use a Docker file. So that's the way of specifying what is installed in the container that we run, and a JSON configuration file to specify some things about the development environment. And I'll show that in a second. Another tool that comes with Docker is Docker Compose. The idea there is you can have multiple containers that are all orchestrated, composed together. So this is an easy way for us to include off-the-shelf dependencies. In the Vagrant ecosystem, right, I'd have to do like sudo apt-get install Ubuntu, or not Ubuntu, sudo apt-get install Postgres, sudo apt-get install Vim, sudo apt-get install blah, 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 right? And now if I want these big other main processes, I just run Postgres. There's a standard Docker image for Postgres, MySQL, Redis, all of those things. I can just say run them, and magically there. So this is a link to the extension, and I'll try to provide this keynote so you can get that link. But if you just go to marketplace.visualstudio.com and search for remote containers, that'll get you. There are other remote plugins, a remote suite of plugins. Another one is SSH. So if you really wanted that Vagrant VM, or you got an old one, or you want to attach to a EC2 or a DigitalOcean droplet, or you name it, you can use Visual Studio Code to SSH into that remote server and hack on that. So you got all the options.
That's sweet.
Before I go, any questions?
I've been using Visual Studio Code with WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, and I love that. But yeah, this sounds like it sounds very similar.
There's a remote WSL as well, so I wonder if that's the extension.
Well, I think it's probably that I'm leveraging. But you just go into the WSL command prompt and just type code dot, and it brings up Visual Studio Code on your Windows machine, but in the Linux context.
Yeah, that's good. I like that integration.
Yeah, it's super slick.
All right, let's build a development environment. So I got my two panes open, but I just got a test one open right here. Let's just ls the directory, right? We just got test.py in there. Well, let's open up VS Code. I'll do that little code dot for you.
There you go.
Make this a little bit bigger. I assume you can't read that or it's hard. So let's see about making that bigger. All right, well, that could be probably the easiest Python script ever, right? Let's hope. All right, so there's nothing else in here. So we're going to completely build one of these remote containers. Oh, Pylin's not installed. Cool. Don't need it yet. All right, so we're going to It's at the top because I've done this before, but you can just type remote containers, add development container configuration files. And now it's going to ask me, it's going to walk me through like a little wizard in VS Code. What do I want? Well, I want Python 3. Cool. Which version of Python 3? How about 9? Do I want Node.js? Not for this. I think printing hello world is safe without Node. So we'll do that. And boom, we got a bunch of files. So we got devcontainer.json and the Docker file. And VS Code has asked us if we want to reopen this in a container. Why, yes, I think I will. So it's going to reboot Visual Studio Code. And let's see, can I click it fast enough? Yeah. And it's building a container for us using the Docker file and the devcontainer.json that we had already specified. All right. Let's just open up a new terminal. Cool. So now I'm in /workspaces/test. I guarantee you that does not exist on my Mac. If we ls in this directory, we're good. We'll do that so we can see that it has our workspace in there. So now I can run test.py. Yay, it says hello world. So good. We have an environment working here. So what version of Python we've got? 3.9.1. Cool. That's what I told it. Let's check what that Docker file looks like. Make this a little bit smaller. Wow, look, all of it's commented out. So really, all it is pulling this Docker image from MCR, Microsoft Container Registry, I think it means, pulling from their dev containers for Python 0.3, matching the variant here. So if I put 2, maybe that would work, or I could hard code 3.8.3.7, something like that. Now this stuff is actually going to be used in the Django one that I have, but because we said don't install Node, and install Node is actually going to be set to false in the dev container JSON. So none of this is running right here. Oops, I just moved that. But this is what it would do to install Node. It's actually going to install NVM inside of the container. So that's kind of fun. But okay, let's look at the meat. Dev container.json. The name, this is whatever you want it to be. Doesn't matter. Default, it's Python 3. That's just matching the name of what we picked. I never change it because I only have one of these. We're saying use the Docker file. If you really wanted to have multiple Docker files for different reasons, you can. I tend to just leave that. Docker has a thing called multi-stage builds that I'll show in the Django version that allows us to have a dev and a prod environment in the same Docker file. So that'll be a little advanced. And the context, that's just what we're sending into the container or into the image build. And that is ... That's the parent directory. That's where our test.py is and likely our other source code. Here we can update some build arguments. So back in this Docker file, we had these arg lines. Those are build arguments for the Docker file. So we can change these here, or we can set the defaults to whatever we want there. Here I'm saying install node false. That's why it was actually come somewhat fast to boot because it didn't have to install anything. And here's some more settings. We'll see some more fun ones in the Django version of this, but we're setting our shell. So here we launched bash, right? Cool, bin bash. Our Python path, we're just setting that to user local bin Python, enabling linting, and then this image comes with a whole bunch of tools. So whatever you're using for linting or type checking or whatever, it is here. So it's already installed for you. And so this is where we're specifying our extensions. So obviously, if we have a Python 3 environment, we probably want the Python extension. So there it is. And forwarded ports, post create command. This one's kind of cool. If we had a requirements.txt, as soon as the container is created, it'll automatically run that command for you. I don't have that here, so I'll leave that off. All right. So this will get a little bit bigger when we go to Django. But let's do one more thing. Let's open up test.py. Let's go over to our run and debug. Let's create a launch.json file. again, VS Code is just walking us through this. Like Python is very well supported in the VS Code ecosystem. So here's our basic Python launch configuration. Cool. I'll just set my breakpoint here. Already had it. And I'll hit run. And there we go. Now we have our breakpoint on this file. So I have a working development environment in, well, I should have been timing this. I don't know, 5 minutes, not even. Now it's a simple project, but like it's really not going to be any harder for Django, because again, everybody or VS Code knows that you probably, if you're working in Python, is going to have Django. So there's some special support for that. I can just hit run. That'll finish. Print hello world, and we can see the big long command that it did, right, to get the ports all configured so that way it could run the debugger. But all right, so that was cool. We got a development environment. Any questions before I move to Django? All right.
I have a question.
Yes, Kennedy, how's it going?
Hey,
Long
how you
time no
doing,
see.
George? Yeah, good to see you. I noticed that you were using the default, I guess, Docker image that comes with the extension. Do you know if
Yes.
you're able to use a different container, a different image for this project? If you,
whatever.
Okay, so you can just
whatever you
change
want.
to any. Okay.
Now you're going to want to make sure that you have some tools installed. You're going to want to make sure you have an image that has a shell. Not all do, but that is fairly common. But you can actually see in this dev container. Let me make this a little bit bigger. If you really want to read through this, you can see all of the different commands that it's running to test for different things. So as long as you have like ls and make dir, it's really just Docker execing into these containers over and over again to run different things. So there's probably something that you have to get just right. I mean, they're building this off of Debian Linux. Actually, the right thing I should tell you, just to shorten that, is all of this, or the Docker files to generate all of these are on their GitHub.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Yep. So there's not a lot you need, but I always base off of theirs for development. And I'll show in the Django one that I'm not using it when I go to prod.
Okay.
So
That's
I
what I
don't
was
care
curious
what they
about.
have installed. It just works, and I'm happy.
All right, cool. Thanks.
I had a question if you have
Yes.
a moment.
Go ahead.
So with Docker, are you able to like load and save files? Are they within the environment or are they on your local hard drive?
Yep. Here. So this is all on my Mac right here. So let's here we go. I'll just do that. And here, if I cat it again, here we go. Files changed. So yeah, everything's still going back and forth to my my local or my host file system. Now there is an option, and I'm going to leave this to the viewer, whatever. You can clone the entire repository inside of a Docker volume. And then everything, literally everything, is in Docker, and nothing is technically on the host.
I mean, I guess the reason I'm asking is, I'd be kind of worried if I'm running inside some process, all of my files, and then it crashes, and now suddenly all my files are gone, and I'm like, oh, oops, yeah, maybe I actually wanted to get the output of that crash, but I can't because it was in a virtual instance, and now all those files are gone. Type of thing.
This current directory is mounted into the container. Now, one thing with Macs, it is treating everything running in the container, or all the files from the container, as authoritative. So if you make changes on the file system outside, now this will work because I'm not making a lot of changes, and you probably aren't in dev either. But like if I touched foo, I don't know. See how that took a little while? I don't know if that was really noticeable, but it hesitated to do the touch. Now, touch is a super fast command. It's just making a file. It cannot get easier. But it had that hesitation. And that's because, and we see them here, the container's view of the file system is authoritative. So any file changes that happen in the container just happen as quickly as they can in the container, and then it's background synced. Now it's very fast background sync, right? I mean, I made the change in this file and it was immediately there. But there's a slight delay. And that's because Mac, there is a VM running in Mac to run all of the containers, right? Because these containers require a Linux kernel. Mac doesn't have a Linux kernel. If you're running this on a Linux box, like if you have Ubuntu or Fedora or something, you're not going to have that problem. It doesn't matter. But there's just a little performance hit when a lot of files are written and it has to sync it every time. So by treating the container as authoritative, it's a lot faster inside the container.
So if you're editing your source code while you're doing this, you don't have to relaunch the Docker image every time you make an edit. It's just automatically pulling in the changes as you make them and rerun. Like
mounting the file system. Yep, it's all just there.
Do you have any insight in how this will work on Windows? Because I know Windows and the Linux subsystem has some issues with permissions. Like you're writing a file in Windows, but then the Linux container sees it as like a root or something like that. I don't know who uses Windows subsystem here, but I know, Josh, you said that you used it. Have you witnessed that issue before?
I'm going to leave that to
haven't.
Josh. We have a thought on that in a second.
Yeah, the only thing that I've seen is that sometimes when I have, and I think it's more of a Visual Studio Code thing. Visual Studio Code, I believe, seems to lock the file system a little bit, but I haven't seen any issues going back and forth between WSL and Windows.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks. I'm going to try this right now, along with you guys.
Well, hold on. I'll give you a better repo to try. All right. So I think we've kind of exhausted this for a little bit. We're going to see this get a little bit more complicated. And in the spirit of some time, I've already launched it. So, but I'll walk through what I've done. So here I have a Django application that I have pre-made. Let me make things a little bit bigger here. For Kennedy. There you go. Go clone that. GitHub.com/GEO4/Django-starter. You can clone this, and if you open it up in VS Code, if you have that remote containers extension already installed, what you'll get is that same reopening container that I had earlier. So before I showed creating all of these dev container files, here I'm showing if it already exists and you open VS Code. So boom, we'll hit reopen in container. It'll do its same little thing. This one might take slightly longer. Let's see if I can click that fast enough. You can see some things. It's doing stuff. And yeah, still quick. I don't really have terribly much installed here. All right, let's get Bash open. Let's make this a little bit bigger.
That's actually something that I've awakened to, is that terminal window inside Visual Studio Code and even Visual Studio. It's so nice to be able to just run all of your commands right there.
Yes. Yeah. I first started having a shell in my editor. I think, was it IntelliJ? That's the first editor I used that in. But here we go. We're start with the Docker file, right? We have the same dev container, Docker file. We have one more now. I mentioned the Docker compose file. We're running Postgres. I don't want to install Postgres inside the container. It's going to run on its own. We'll get there. But we're going to see the same beginning to a Docker file, right? We're running from that same MCR. One thing that's going to be a little bit different and may address Kennedy's question there is about user ID mapping. So here, I'm setting the user ID to 1,000. We can set this to other things for the build args, and we can also pass those in the Docker compose file. So if we have environment variables, we can send those in. But this is how I can do some kind of mapping between, root inside the container versus whatever users I have on my host. I'm also making sure I give VS Code here root access. I don't know. Why not? Make it a little bit more complicated, but that way you have more example to work off of. So just ch owning and user modding, group modding. Cool. Same install node. This time it's going to be true because it's a web application. It's probably JavaScript somewhere. This one's also cool. If your requirements don't change very often, well, you might as well just build them into the base image instead of running them after the fact, like I showed earlier in the dev container.json. And then I'm just going to install a couple of tools. I'm going to install Vim inside my container, so that way I can have Vim inside a container inside VS Code. I don't know, it just seems cool. Why not? And because I have Postgres, sometimes I like working command line there. Also, some manage.py DB shell is going to run PSQL, so helps to have that around. And kind of a quick aside, this, Kennedy, for your earlier question, I'm using the MCR image for development. So I'm tagging this as development. We'll see this in the Docker Compose in a second. But then Docker has this concept of multi-stage builds. So every time there's a from line, you have a new stage. And this stage, I'm just pulling from the regular Python image. You could pull Python Slim, whatever. Same version number, tagging it as production. If you Docker build this Docker file without a target, it'll just run them all. So it'll set up my dev environment. If I have any build steps that I need to do, like Webpack or Django fun that I want to do, Python Magic, whatever, you can do that inside of your image. You can have another step in between that's doing like running your unit tests because you want those to work before you build the production image. Running Bandit for security testing, so yeah, static analysis. But yeah, so then I copy the requirements.txt here, install my requirements, set my path to include everything on there, and copy the rest of the stuff, and boom, there we go. Entry points, just a quick little script. I use Daphne to run it, and if you provide other arguments to this script, it will run them. So if you want to run your database migrations, you can run the same Docker image. It'll just pass it right through. But mildly advanced. We'll get there.
Magic.
All right, so let's.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
That's super cool.
So that Docker Compose file, kind of work left to right here. A lot of the same stuff that we saw before, right? We're setting our context. We had in our dev container. Now we're going to set it in our Docker Compose. So we're going to say build the application from what's in the parent directory, right? That has all of our source code. The Docker file we're going to use is relative to those dots. So dev container / Docker file. And this is that target, right? Development. We don't want to run the production version of that image. We want the development. So we're there. And here's all of the args, right? We're saying the same stuff. On Linux, you may need to set that. I'm not, so we're cool. I'm setting some environment variables, right? So my Postgres user, database password, host, port, all right here. Yeah, it's my secret key, but it's only for development. Go ahead and steal it. And obviously we have to mount, right? So this is where things are kind of less automated for us, right? With Docker Compose, we said we want more control. So we're going to mount the parent directory, right? Again, that's where all of our stuff is, to /workspace. And that's that cached item, right? We're saying that what's in the container is authoritative. On Linux, it doesn't matter as much, but it doesn't hurt. So if we're doing our development in the container anyway, might as well say it's authoritative. Fine. This is kind of like a Docker hack. This is, I just love this, right? We want this container to run, right? And containers are just processes. So if we just tell it to run like echo 4, I don't know, right? That process died, and there goes our container. We have no development environment. So we're going to say sleep infinity. So that way there's just kind of like a placeholder image or placeholder process that just always runs. And that way we can attach our tools. We can attach all of our processes. Bash here is just another process that we've execed into this container to execute. So yeah, we want it to just run forever, sleep infinity. Our network mode, we're going to run with the database. So here is our second process. I'll just jump to that now. We're running the database. I'm just calling it DB, right? I have app here is our name, and DB is the other name. Network mode says run the app container in the same network as the database. Just allows us to do localhost. And it lets VS Code do some fun with port mappings that we'll see in the dev container. But yeah, same stuff, right? We're just going to set the username, default database, default password. Just left them as Postgres. Feel free to change it to whatever you want. And yeah, so now all of our Postgres data is going to be in a Docker volume. You could also mount it to somewhere on your host if you really wanted to. I don't. I like to just be able to blow it all away and say start over. Let's see. Dev container.
So,
yep.
I'd like to go back to the command, the sleep infinity. Is
Yeah,
that
man.
just because that there's no server aspect to that container, and so that just kind of keeps it there? Okay.
Yeah. It's just we just need to keep it alive.
Yeah.
Right. You know, if our container was Echo or Bash or something like that, I guess Bash could actually work, right? Because Bash wouldn't stop. Maybe. I don't know if it would stop because there's no TTY attached at that point. But whatever. Sleep Infinity works, so we're going to do Sleep Infinity. But yeah, we just need it to stick around. So really, right, because a container is essentially just a process running with a bunch of files isolated from the others. Right, when you do Docker run Ubuntu, right, you're not running Ubuntu, right? Ubuntu has a kernel, right? There's a Linux kernel in that. But Ubuntu has a standard layout for all of its files, right? So it's familiar. We know where things are. Debian, same idea. Fedora, whatever. Right? There's no systemd. There's no PID1, right? It's the process ID is just whatever we have, right? So we're just running Sleep Infinity, and that's the process of our container. But we still need to interact with all of those tools we just installed into this thing. So we're just going to have that run, then we're going to exec in later.
Gotcha.
I wonder if I go back in here. There were some Docker execs. I don't know if I'm going to find them. At least if I do, it's going to be. Either way. So yeah, like this run-in container, it's running a Docker exec into the container ID, which is one of these long hashes.
There's one.
Yep.
Top one.
Oh, there it is. Yep, Docker exec. So yeah, look at all of that fun stuff that we're running. So we have a lot of different sockets, right? Mounting things, yeah, whatever. So yeah, Sleep Infinity at this point is already running.
Right.
So now we can just keep shelling in. And so there's a fun thing I mentioned, I very quickly alluded to Podman earlier. You can alias Docker or Podman to Docker, or the other way, whatever. Alias Docker equals Podman, say it that way. And Visual Studio Code, if you really don't want to run Docker, and this is again advanced, you can trick it into running Podman for you. Just another container runtime if you don't like Docker, which some security-minded folks don't. Because Docker runs as root.
Okay.
But yeah, let's see. Let's pop over to the dev container and make this smaller. So we have a couple of things here. We changed the name, right? It's Python 3 and PostgreSQL this time. We're using a Docker Compose file. Pretty basic, right? Just going to say docker compose.yaml. Name it whatever you want. And the service that we're attaching to. So we have to kind of sync these, right? So in the Docker Compose, our service name was app. Change it if you want, but then you have to come in here and change it too. So if you have a whole bunch of containers, you want to make sure that the one the development environment is in matches one that's actually running here. Like if I went and just changed this and added more P's, everything's going to break. So let's not do that. A couple of extra little, well, really just one that I want to highlight, setting. So because I'm running PostgreSQL, I want to be able to run commands like SQL commands. I want to run select statements or whatever into that Postgres. So there's another extension called SQL Tools, and I want to configure some connections for it. Well, I want it to connect to that Postgres, right? So I'm going to pass in that database username and password, again, matching everything that's in here, same that the application is connecting as. So now I have another extension here. See, I see container database is already up here. That matches this name. We'll just hit this real quick. We'll open up a new file. We'll do select star from, and because I did already run the Django migrations beforehand, just to make sure everything for this presentation worked, I can run that, and once it connects, there we go. Now and this extension, let me disconnect. Close that. Nope, don't save. This extension is installed down here. So now anybody else, so if Kennedy were to git clone this, launch this in VS Code, he's going to have SQL Tools installed in VS Code. He's going to have that connection already done to Postgres, just like I have here. So now if I'm managing a dev team, right, I know what everybody has installed. I know where to tell them to click. I know what to tell them to run in their little file that I know popped up, right? So there's some advantages here. And if you're doing an open source project, you have everybody in the world, right? You didn't interview any of them that are contributing, right? And when you're writing those help docs, you can show pictures and know what they're looking at. I think that's just huge.
How much of that was scaffolded for you?
Most of it. Like seriously, like if I'm not going to do it again. Actually, okay. I can't hear, but like remember when I had that drop down options?
Yeah.
Right. One of them was Python and Postgres. It got me 90% of the way there.
Okay.
But you got that GitHub repo, right? go4/Django-starter.
Yep.
Where you can have all of this. So,
cool.
And here I'm going to forward some more ports, 8,000, 5432, whatever, Django and Postgres. So that way, if I have any tools that I'm used to using, like Beekeeper Studio or PG whatever, you can still use those on your host and connect to Postgres. But I think this gets me 90% of the way there, so I'm good with that. And this one, because it is a Django application, I want to install all of my requirements.txt at the start. And that's actually kind of a fun one. I just want to take an aside for. I used to love Poetry and pipenv and all of these tools that were more complicated than pip to manage team environments. I've essentially said no more to those, because if I'm running everything in a container, I don't need to worry about virtual environment isolation anymore. I can literally just install at the user level, because the only Python packages that are installed are the ones that are in this requirement text file. I don't have to worry about that anymore. So, I don't know. And the cool thing that you get from this MCR Python version was all of these like formatting tools, right? So like, I'm going to use PyTest. I'm going to use Bandit. I'm going to use Flake8. I'm going to use MyPy. I'm going to use Yap, Black, whatever. It's already installed. I don't need to pollute my requirements.txt file nearly as much anymore. So I'm kind of cool with that. I'll just have one single requirements.txt file and not have to worry about pipenv being mad about the wrong Python version or something. It's all just there. All right. So we kind of have all of this set up. Didn't really look through this. It is a Django application. I did the Django tutorial, just basic spin up an application. So let's see it run, right? So this launch configuration is going to be a little bit different because of that line. Essentially the same thing as before, right? The program changes. In our test.py, we were saying the current file that we're looking at, right? So if we just hit run, it would run whatever file is in our current view in VS Code. Now we're always going to run manage.py. It's Django. The argument we're going to give to manage.py is run server. And we're just going to tell VS Code that it's Django. Cool. So let's go here. Let's open settings.py. Let's set a breakpoint. So that way we have some variables to look at and we can see what it looks like. Cool, that start. Boom, there we go. And the other cool thing about VS Code, just quick interjection, it auto detects if you run something that exposes a port that you haven't configured. So right now, because VS Code itself, and this is mildly annoying because it will say this a lot, so I probably should just add 33287 into the forwarded ports just so it shuts up. But it auto detected that we had forwarded ports, that this one is running now, and it's not exposed. So it's going to ask us, hey, did you forget? Do you want to add this one in? Well, I don't right now, but thanks VS Code for trying to be helpful. All right, so we hit our breakpoint. We can see all of the different variables that are set. We can set different watch expressions if we wanted. But yeah, now we have, we can set breakpoints in our application and get all of the things. And now the process is running. Pause on the breakpoint. Cool, things go away. Bet you didn't know settings was loaded twice, I guess. And yeah, we can kill it all from in there. And now it's no longer asking us because I killed it.
Now, can you still connect to it on the prescribed the loopback?
Thank you. I forgot that. Let me rerun it. Go away. Yep, there we go. You can see it going in the bottom there. And there we go. We've loaded it. So yeah, I'm on localhost 8000. If I get rid of this. All right, we can see all of our requests go by. So we are hitting, crazy. We are running in a container, forwarding port 8000, looking at it in Firefox. So yeah, there's running Django without needing to have Python installed on your host. Not clickbait. Adam, good timing. All right. Any questions about that? Did anybody try running it? Basically, Kennedy, did you clone it?
Unfortunately, I turned off virtualization on my motherboard, so I have to restart the computer and enable that in order for me to try this.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's going to be important for this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
George, I have a quick question. This is Sal.
Yes.
How you doing?
How's it going?
Good, thanks. Two questions. The first one is, how do you shut everything down? And the second question is, how do you protect your secret key because you're gonna, push this to Git. Is it just a standard .env file, and you can then use .env within your application?
Yes. So, couple of things. Let's go into here. So for my secret key in the settings.json, I am pulling that from environment variables. So when I run this in production, it's going to have a different environment variable than when I'm running it locally. So yeah, all of my developers are going to run the same secret key. That's fine. But when it goes to production, the Docker image. Now, so this is actually one thing, I guess I should show this, that you can't do in here, right? I can't do a Docker build inside of this container. But this is the command that I would run. So let me pop this up. So -t, I don't know, prod Django.
Seems like a little bit of Inception.
Right. .dev container, Docker file. So I shouldn't say you can't do it, but you're going to have to configure more things, right? You're going to have to mount the Docker socket into this. You're going to have to install the Docker client into this container. And then you could do it. Or if you were doing Podman, it actually would be easier with Podman, right? Because you can run Podman system service on the host and then expose that on a port and then have a Podman system configuration inside of here that would then loop back to the host. But either way, that sounds complicated. I'm not doing it. So this is how I would build the production image. And this is not going to have the secret key baked in at all. When this prod Django image is run and made into a container, you're going to have to specify, and I'll just do it this way. So let's assume I made it as that, right? So we'll do Docker run or MRT prod Django, right? So that'll run it, except it'll fail. We need to do things like this.
Okay, I see.
Right. So in production, the previous image is made, and then I'm going to Docker run, and I'm going to have to specify every environment variable that I had here, right? So secret key is going to have to get sent. Postgres user database, all of these guys are going to have to get sent as well. If they're not, it'll fail, right? Because if I don't tell it what database to use, it can't connect to one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this is how you would have to specify that.
Thanks.
Also, I think you joined RocDev Slack, so good job.
Yep.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Checking chat. Awesome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you've demonstrated the Django, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Did you create this? You created this Django project by following the tutorial online, right?
Yeah, I just did like Django and Knit and all that.
Okay, cool. Okay, because okay. For some reason, I thought you did. There was like there's a scaffold generator built into. But because I was about to ask if there's like a Flask version that you know of, but I guess if you made this by hand,
honestly,
it wasn't a generator.
Well, so remember earlier, right, when I did the remote containers, is one of them. It's probably not going to ask me to do it because I'm already in the container. When I told it to add the configuration files, I wonder if no, it's not going to. It doesn't give me that option when I'm in the container. One of the options was a Python application with Postgres, and that generated a majority of the dev container, Docker Compose, Docker file stuff already.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then with launch JSON too, there's a way to do it. Add a config or something. Let's see if I open up launch JSON, have another add a configuration. Right, I get a bunch of different options here. One of those options is Django application.
Interesting.
I already did it, so it's not going to give me the option I already have.
Right.
But that's one of them. So really, most of this is just walking through what VS Code gives you. And yeah, I made some changes, but
I see.
not a lot.
Nice.
And so the other thing, right? There's a lot of different ones for different languages, right? So if you're using Node.js, it's probably Node and Python are probably the top two most well supported in the VS Code world. All of this is going to be doable for like an Express server or Next.js even. That's another one I have set up. That's actually the RocDev site is in Next. So I got the same setup for that.
You're making me convert from PyCharm to VS Code.
It works. It does everything I need it to, right? It has a terminal. Cool. Syntax highlighting, auto completion. And this whole container setup just works.
George, have you tried synchronizing different copies of VS Code across different platforms? There's a new sync function that I think it talks over GitHub or something like that. Works pretty well. So if you got extensions that, like I'm on a Chromebook, I've got VS Code loaded on my PC for work, and my Macs at home, they all have the same exact extensions they keep in sync. It's that little face icon there, bottom left. If you click on that, I think you can turn on sync settings or something like that.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. No, I haven't used it. One thing, actually that brings up another good point. Thanks. I haven't used that, but because Microsoft now owns GitHub, if the repo has a dev container.json, you can spin up a VS Code-ish instance on GitHub. You can a code workspace or whatever they call it, code spaces or something. So you can get this development environment with all of these extensions in Firefox.
That's mind-blowing.
Magic.
This is bonus points, bonus time. I wonder if it come on, Zoom window, get out of the way. I want to see if I can find it.
I'm going to clone your repo and try it.
I'm going to see if this repo has it. So I think the repo owner has to turn something on maybe, or you have to turn something on, because running a code space does cost money, right? You will have to pay GitHub to do that because you're running a server, right? It's not your code, or not your compute. Get that Zoom window out of the way. Yeah, let's see, code spaces. Yeah, so I got one here for the RocDev website. I don't have it running because money, but I could. Oh, yeah, let's just click it. But yeah, I have a dev container for this, so that's what it's building. Right, it's starting the code space. It's just running the container. It might take a minute. It's going to be longer than running it on your local, but hey. But yeah, you can see I have a completely different. I have its own little website and everything. I haven't run this in a while, so I don't know if it's going to work, but hopefully. What's that, code rot? But yeah, well, we have our fingers crossed that this thing randomly still works after like 2 months of not using it. Any other questions?
That's super cool. And I'm totally with you on the virtual env. That is, it was always such a complication.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've run into some weird problems, and this is kind of like the other thing, where Jenkins is running, Python 3.9, and the pipenv file has 3.8, so now I have to have a way for Jenkins to switch all of these versions. So now I'm just running all of my builds in containers, and I'm just like, wait, why aren't I just doing everything in containers?
Right.
Like once the whole pipeline is contained, then it doesn't matter anymore. And I don't know.
I heard the expression "make box" on 2 occasions, and when I asked for clarity, it says, "Well, it means nothing happens out here; it all happens in the container."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, "Then why not do it virtually?" And no, you don't want to do it virtually. You just want to use containers. And I think the reason they were saying containers was that's all they knew. They didn't really know how they could get it to work in a virtual environment.
Well,
I mean, containers,
that's overhead.
right? They're just processes. They can run in VMs.
Oh no, they didn't. They knew they existed, but all the code that they had was designed to work in a container.
Sure. Yeah, you could probably move that pretty easily.
I think I could see using this. I work with a lot of different teams all on the same project, and it's Node and Python for an embedded project. And just going through the troubleshooting of setting up Python in the different environments and environmental variables on Windows and Node versions, all the different versions of packages, and sometimes the packages need to be built from scratch and stuff like that, having them all contained within a container description so that you don't have to manually walk somebody through the process every time you're onboarding someone new. I think it could be pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Assuming that I could figure this all out. So I think I kind of glossed over all the details.
Yeah.
I just kind of when you're watching something with this much detail in it and you're starting from ground zero, you kind of just look at the big picture and not the individual pieces because you don't want your mind to fry or short circuit. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I shouldn't say every, but pretty much every presentation I do, I want to have it in GitHub. I want to have something executable in GitHub because, a lot of that, and that's the other thing. We've started recording all of these meetups now, so you're going to be able to watch this again, and you're going to have the running code that I used in this demo. So, I fully expect, or I don't expect anyone to ever understand everything the first go. So that's why I want something durable. And now we got 2 things durable. So this will be on probably both YouTube channels. Why not? RocPy and RocDev. I'll post a link in the meetup afterwards once this goes live. I still do have to edit it.
Thank you, George.
But yeah. Let's see. So it started, right? I'm gonna say no to checking for updates. Whatever. Who cares about that for right now? But here's the application fully running in a container in GitHub's infrastructure somewhere, all because I had a dev container.json. That's it, right? I just did this. This is actually something I don't have to do anymore. Remember, it is still in beta. One thing I didn't show with this is Git commands do work in the container now, and when I first did this, they didn't. So if you notice here, I have to pass in my Git config, so that way it knows my username and password, or not my password, but my email address and all those standard things that you need to do Git commits. That's all mounted in now. But it didn't fail when it was running up in GitHub Codespaces, so I just left it there. But anyway. So yeah, all these different little things just works. And here are all the favicons, pages. I can edit this. I can commit it back to the repo.
That's crazy.
I can run it if I want. I didn't set that yet for this, I guess. This is a fun one. I guess it has the Docker thing and it can't connect to see the running containers.
Yeah.
Security.
Yes.
But yeah.
I have a extension question.
Please.
So you've demonstrated how to create a Docker image and spin it up from scratch. Do you know if the extension is able to log into a already made Docker image, Docker container, and modify the files inside of it, like a debugging session,
So you did
without
like a
having the
Docker.
original? Yeah, without
Yeah.
having the original source code. Like if you have an issue with a Docker image, and you're like, oh, I got to debug that, and you remote and can VS Code remote into that box and start debugging.
I'm gonna do one thing. You technically, I think I can figure out a way to do that. So
I know
you
we're
have
cheating
the
right
files.
now, but
You have the files, right? No matter what, you need the files. Otherwise, debugging can't work, right? It doesn't know where to put the breakpoint,
Mhm.
right? So you have to get the files somehow.
That's true.
If it's a Python or a Ruby or Node.js application, the files are there, right? They're not in RAM disk or anything like that, right? They're in the Docker image. So you can Docker CP, as long as you can connect to the Docker daemon, right? That's going to also be a requirement. You can Docker CP all of the files, so you can set your breakpoints in VS Code. If you have everything in a Docker volume, then VS Code could work with that. I'm thinking though it's gonna somehow need to know like the container ID. Like it's technically feasible, right? Because it's just running all of these Docker shell commands essentially, right?
Right.
Right when I showed those in here, right? It's just Docker execing. So like it seems like it's technically feasible. I don't know if they fully built it, but I'm wondering if you could hack it. Because you have the files.
That's what I'm feeling.
You can attach to the volume. As long as you can get to the Docker daemon, all of those commands should work. Maybe?
I guess I gotta try it out.
It's also just exposing a port, right? Like it was 33.287 or something like that for the Python debugger port. So as long as that's exposed too, then why not?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like the Ansible. All you have to be able to do is SSH.
Right.
And then you can do everything and set up and scaffold whatever you need.
Yeah, because like the way I'm wondering if you can hack it is maybe through Docker Compose. It might be a little bit easier, right? Because this is, or maybe there's more options in Dev Container I don't know about, right? Because we're telling it what service it is. So if I can somehow trick it to thinking that service is remote, right? Because the other thing I'm thinking is Docker contexts, right? So I mean, I can't run it here. I'm in a container, but right, I can Docker context create, and as long as I can connect to the daemon somewhere else, if I name it foo or something, -h, I don't know, 10.204.200.1 or something, I don't know, port, I don't even remember what it is, 80 something. As long as I can connect to that Docker daemon.
I see what you mean now. Yeah.
Right. And set that as the Docker context for which VS Code is working. Maybe?
Maybe.
I don't know if that's a use case they've thought of.
Probably not.
I'm wondering if it can be hacked in.
Because like I'm trying to think of a use case where if a team member of mine spun up a Docker container on like AWS or something like that, and they're having an issue, and since we're working remotely now, I can't just go to his desk and see what's going on. I need to remote into his machine or remote into that same Docker image and pull down the same manifest or the same, I guess, environment situation, so I can debug with him. But that's probably, I'm not sure. But that's interesting.
Now, there was another extension for VS Code. I haven't used it. I can't really remember, where you could do remote debug sessions with people. Right? Didn't that exist?
I have no idea.
Maybe that was an Atom extension. or at least it started as an add-in extension, and then VS Code added it. Let's see.
Interesting. All right, thanks. I'll
Yeah,
look
so
into this.
that may be another one to look at. I think there's like a specific extension for remote debug pairing.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the way to go. Because then they're running their VS Code container, and then you're running your VS Code as a client to their VS Code. Oh God.
Yeah.
But that should work too, as long as you have a network connection.
Yeah. All right.
But yeah, you're pushing the limits of it. Come on, it's still beta.
Yeah.
Oh. I targeted an hour with questions I went over. Any others? All right, I'll stop my share. Move some Zoom windows around again. And let's see, stop that recording.